rise up high. Turn it up, it's time. Tall boy on the line. Loud breeze, they will last. Raise your...
Welcome back to episode 251 of the Tall Boy Radio podcast. And as we always say, who knows where it goes when the beer flows? Well, we have another guest on this week and another serious topic. But before we get serious, let's find out how Dave's week has been. David?
It's on Tuesday. What do you mean how the week's been?
Well, since the last time you're on, the last 7 days, if you will.
It's 14 days since I was last on, wasn't it? I wasn't on last week.
I'll give you that.
Yeah, keep up.
You were actually, David, and we'll come to that in a second because I've spent my week fending off emails about the comments you made about President Trump.
Oh, was that last week? Oh, I'm trying to forget that one.
Yeah, that was last week.
Yeah, I'm sporting a bit of a sore throat, a bit under the weather, and I'm about to find out what a combination of Guinness Zero and Hull Soothers tastes like. So if you see me throwing up, you know it's not a good one.
Blackcurrant Hull Soothers by any chance?
They are cherry, actually.
I don't see that working. Yeah. So my week, David, has been dealing with emails of angry listeners after you described Trump voters as uneducated.
I think I do caveat that by saying I am not saying this is everybody. I'm just saying that the data shows that people that vote Trump tend to have less college education. I think that's the point I made.
Okay. We'll leave that one there. I don't want any more angry emails. So we'll move on swiftly to our guest. Sherry, would you like to say hello? And without causing controversy, tell us a little bit about what it is that you wanted to talk about tonight.
I'll do my very best, although this has been quite an interesting introduction and into understanding a little bit about what's gone on in the past. So I'm Sherry. I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about neurodiversity, what it is, and I guess what it feels like for me and what my journey has been like.
Indeed, and to be honest, we were chatting a little bit in the green room in inverted commas there before we started, and it's an interesting one because when David sort of said that you would like to come on and talk about what you want to talk about, it was a phrase I'd only heard literally a month or two before. As I was saying to yourself there, I was on a cruise in August and my daughter was playing with another little girl, and Kim, my wife, and this little girl's mother were chatting, and she was saying she was neurodiverse, and it wasn't a phrase I'd ever heard before. We literally had to, what does that actually mean? So for the benefit of our listeners, can you tell us then a little bit about that phrase and what it means?
So there's a lot of kind of controversy about the phrase neurodiverse, because I guess in plain English terms, everyone is neurodiverse. Everyone sits on a spectrum of behaviour, and some people refer to themselves as neurodiverse. They're comfortable with it. Some people prefer the term neurodivergent, because what that means effectively is you've got a spectrum of people. We all sit somewhere, but the majority of people are neurotypical. So they sit in the middle. They're, what society expects. Whereas people that are either end of that are what you would call neurodivergent. So that's things like autism, that's things like ADHD, it's things like dyslexia, and things like Tourette's. And I think what used to be called Asperger's, but now sits under the umbrella of autism as well. So it's quite a range of things, really. But that's what it means, really, to be neurodivergent. It means that you identify with one of those conditions.
Right. I mean, it's a pretty broad umbrella, isn't it? When you're covering a number of things there, like you say, Asperger's, or like you say that now, as I understand it, is covered by autism. But so dyslexia and a number of other things as well. So, I mean, that is a diverse. There's a real diversity there. It affects people in very, very different ways. What's your experience with it then, if you don't mind my asking?
So it was quite new to me, probably until maybe a year or so ago. We've all heard of things like autism. We've all seen ADHD kind of take over in the media a lot. But what it really means, I think there's still a lot of misinformation about. And my journey kind of started because of my daughter's struggles in the school. And I was working very heavily with teachers trying to understand why she struggled so much. And going through that entire process was very lengthy, very stressful. And not really very supportive at all from various perspectives, whether it's schools, whether it's councils. But the end result, actually, this year, she's finally been given a diagnosis of autism and also dyslexia. So at least that means then that she can start to understand, firstly, a bit more about who she is and why she is the way she is. But also it means the schools can start to identify how they can support her because they understand a bit more about those conditions.
Mm.
So for her, it might mean she needs a bit more support in the classroom. She might need a teacher with her a bit more because the way that she learns things is quite singular. So, you'll have a maths test, for example. If it says, what's 2 times 2, she'll write that down. But if it then has a worded puzzle and you have to try and work out what the sum is that you've got to do, she's completely floored. And she just can't make any sense out of what that question's asking her. So it's little things like that. And it's just understanding how people learn best to be able to give them the support that they need.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think in terms of people anyway, regardless of any sort of, position on any spectrum, people learn differently anyway, don't they? There's different techniques that suit others and different techniques that don't suit others that well. And it, and how people learn is entirely different from one person to the next. And trying to teach then becomes challenging to understand how to get the message across to them. However, in the case of your daughter there, obviously, I guess once you have a diagnosis for this, you have a much better idea of how you can then assist this person. So it's really important to get that diagnosis. Now, you said there at the start that, was there enough knowledge about about neurodiversity? Was it new to the teachers? Unfortunately, Gaz, who's not, who isn't with us tonight, is a teacher in a school, which I think, would actually, be really beneficial. He deals with this kind of thing all the time. So it's a pity that he couldn't join us tonight. But what was the level of knowledge that you experienced, like say from councils and schools?
I would say it very much depends on the school. And we had some huge challenges in her earlier years where they sort of said to me, oh, we've put her through this test, we've put her through that test. We can't find anything wrong with her, when I quote the word wrong. And that was their outlook on it. But she's not a child who's badly behaved. She's very quiet, she's very reserved, and she's very conscientious. So she was very much overlooked, I think, for many years. And with COVID and lockdown, that didn't help at all because everyone's at home. You couldn't really identify what the challenges were unless you're one of us trying to desperately get through her work. But she's one of 5 kids that we've got. So again, that was just, the whole thing was chaos.
Oh, wow.
I could never go back to lockdown. That was a stressful time. But yeah, that kind of resulted in, she ended up developing severe anxiety from that. And she ended up with a teacher that she felt was particularly unsupportive and almost judgmental of her, made her aware that she was bottom of the class, made her aware that she struggled, told her, you need to speak up more, you need to be more involved. And just pushing her to be completely the opposite of what she feels comfortable with. So we moved her to a different school, and that was her choice. She wanted to be a part of that decision. And we moved her somewhere that 2 of my stepchildren had gone before. So, we knew it was a great school. It's a bit further out of the way, so it means a bit more travel, but it made such a difference to her. Her confidence grew, and then her learning started to improve. It was amazing to just see the transition that she went through. And unfortunately, that was the last year of primary school for her. So she's now in a position where she's starting at secondary, and we're almost starting all over again with the challenges.
Yeah, that was going to be my question. Does it feel like you're starting again? I can imagine that it is, and you can't understate enough the impact that I think that lockdown had on everybody. Us as adults, we're faced with something in our life that we'd never dealt with before and never expected to deal with, and we had no idea how long it was going to last. And for a child or someone much younger than us, a year in my life is 150th or 151st, if you want to be particularly accurate, to my son, who was 1 as we were in lockdown. You know what I mean? It's 100% of his life, so it's entirely more relevant to them than it is to us. So I'm pleased to hear that you've found a school there that is much better suited to her needs then. So How was she integrating now into secondary school? Is it different there? Is there a greater awareness? I'm guessing there's more students, which brings with it its own challenges.
Yeah, you go from a school where there's 300 kids, and everyone knows everyone and everyone gossips about everyone, to a school where there's probably more like 1,300 kids. And it's huge, and the age ranges are so much bigger. You've got teenagers in there, so it just all adds into the mix. So I think the peer pressure is a lot harder anyway for any child. I was sort of thinking about before this, my experience of school, and I did lower, middle, and upper. So I think that makes transition so much simpler, because when you move in year 5, you're like, what, 9 years old? You haven't really hit puberty, you haven't got any of that other stuff going on. Whereas now, this whole primary, secondary thing, you're moving into a completely different environment. You've got to learn new teachers, a new school, new ways of doing things, a lot less support. At the same time, you're just starting to hit puberty. That's crazy for every child. And to do it with these additional burdens, hats off to her. She does an amazing job. She's such a resilient kid. She goes in every day. She gives it her best. She falls asleep in the car on the way home. She's shattered by the end of a Monday. And she has PE on a Monday, so that's never a good start to the week. But, she wants to do her homework. She wants to do well. And we've had those kinds of conversations with the school. Where is the TA support? Why does that suddenly disappear when you get to secondary school? Why on earth? This is such a critical time for children where they're working up to their GCSEs, which are going to potentially lead them into college and university and determine their careers. Why on earth don't they have that extra funded support? It's just absolutely crazy. Why is it such a different environment between primary and secondary? And I guess middle school is that gap that they just didn't close. They didn't fill it at all. It just astonishes me.
It's a massive contrast, isn't it? Adam's kids have still actually got a little while to go. Yeah, both of mine are, well, they're at the other end actually. One is in upper 6th, so about to leave school, and Albert's in the 5th form, for those of us old enough to remember, which is 11, year 11 now, and Alison therefore 13. But yeah, so that jump, between 6 and 7, 5 and 6.
Yeah, I moved from lower school was year 4, and then I moved into middle school in year 5.
Yeah,
and then
now the jump is straight from, is it 6 to it's what we used to call year 5.
It's crazy, absolutely crazy.
But
they're tweens. You move when they're, you're not a teenager, you're a tween. As I'm constantly reminded by her, I'm not allowed to call her a child anymore. She is a tween. And she's got a great little personality. But yes, it's a really tough time to move. And girls versus boys, there's probably a bit of a debate about toilets and periods and all that kind of general stuff that I hear from the eldest, my stepdaughter, who is about to turn 15 this week. I think I'd forgotten. Luckily my husband is dealing with it. But yeah, it's hard enough for her because she hit puberty as soon as she started, and you hear, they don't let them just go to the toilet when they need to go to the toilet. You have to stand there and say, I'm on my period, like I need to go to the toilet.
Mm-hmm.
That's anxiety inducing enough. And she's going to have to deal with that on top of all of this. I really don't understand the system.
It's not set up to be accommodating for a large portion of kids, let alone those that have other like neurodiversity and other things going on at the same time. You used a word when you were referring to the first primary school, and you said the teacher had said that your child had nothing wrong with them, and that stood out to me. And Alice, my daughter, is always said there's no normal, there's no such thing as normal. Everybody is just different. And my question, I guess, was how damaging can something as simple as that be, by saying that you're not normal, or it's wrong? Those very simple words, how damaging can they be for a child?
Incredibly.
Or anybody?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been told I'm weird. You grow up with a certain word, but weird is, I guess weird is weird. I'm happy to be weird. I'm happy to be quirky. You get to a certain point in your life where you're just like, I'm a nerd, I don't care. But yeah, she would have been a nine-year-old girl, I think, at that point. And she's struggling to make friends as it is, because she doesn't quite understand normal social cues. You know, one day they're her friends, the next day they're playing with somebody else. It's completely innocent. But to her, that means, oh, they don't like me anymore. You know, why don't they want to be my friend? And she would never go and approach them and ask that. So when you then suddenly haven't got the support from your teacher, as well as you're struggling with children and peers, you're just completely alone. And that did result in her not just developing anxiety, but she was screaming, crying. You know, we were having to drag her into school, and I hated having to do that. But if I don't take her into school, as a parent, I get fined. So what do I do? And I just trying to push the school to do something, and you just fobbed off constantly. There's no clarity on, you know, the complaints process. There's no clarity on anything. There's just, I remember being sat in a room with the head teacher once. So I got called in to speak with the head teacher after I made a post. Not a post, I just commented on something on Facebook, I think it was. And somebody was asking about the school, and, you know, oh, we're moving to the area, we're looking at where to send our children. We've looked at this school, what's everyone's views? And I gave my honest opinion. I didn't name anyone. You know, I just said my daughter's not got along very well there. They've not been very supportive for neurodivergent children. And I got pulled into the head teacher's office and was told I'd upset the teacher.
Good. That's what I would say. Good if you've upset them, because sometimes these people need upsetting. You know,
amazing. But that was clearly the kind of click that they had, you know, to protect the teachers. And I get it. Schools are struggling. Schools are underfunded. They are undereducated as teachers. You know, they don't know how to deal with modern students anymore. That support hasn't been there for them for a very long time. But there's no excuse for not being a decent human being and looking out for the welfare of a child. So, yeah, no. Very pleased to leave that school behind.
I can well imagine. No, I know you're 100% right there. Do you know what I mean? There's never anything wrong with speaking your mind and sharing the truth as you see it. There's nothing wrong with that. If it upsets somebody, well, maybe sometimes these people do need upsetting, because they do need a bit of dose of reality. Not all the time, but in this case, I'm going to say it sounded like that was the case. And like Dave's daughter has correctly said, there is no such thing in life as normal. That is a fact, you know. And when we're looking at things like this, then we talk about a spectrum, and everybody is on that spectrum at one point or another, you know. Yeah. And that's the definition of, you know, that's life. That's exactly how it pans out. Nobody's in exactly the same position, and if you are on that spectrum, then you're in a different position on another. And we need to accept that. And like you say, it's nice to be quirky, it's nice to be weird, but we're at an age now where we have a good idea of who we are, how we got there, and the things that have formed us. You know, I can remember growing up and, you know, the quirkiness of my character. And it's interesting because every now and then I'll bump into people who I went to school with that I haven't seen for 35 years, and they'll still remember me as that person. The person I was in school who's still trying to find myself, which in itself is utterly bizarre anyway. You know what I mean? I'm a 51-year-old man. You know, all right, I've much matured since I was 14, but that's by the by. I do my best. But it's very interesting how we define and we put labels on. But then at the same time, like you say, you talked about the diagnosis, and there is a little bit of sticking a label on somebody to help you understand them. So what was that diagnosis? What was that process like? How challenging was it to get that diagnosis in the first place? And were there any misdiagnoses on the way?
Yes. Yeah, definitely. So with the school that were challenging, I tried to push for the external support. So you have to go for what they call a CAMS referral. It's something just like the Children and Adolescents Mental Health Service or something. So that's effectively the government service that will determine what support you can get, whether you're suitable for diagnosis, etc. So the school or the GP has to refer a child to that service. And I worked with the school on really trying to push that through. And they did, but for their part, they filled it in such a half-assed way that it was just like, oh, she's a kid with a few worries, was basically what it came down to. So I was so happy when she moved and we finally managed to get put onto the waiting list and be seen by an educational psychologist, because that's the next stage. They have to go through that assessment in schools. So that's quite stressful as well. You've got some random person coming in to sit there with you in your lessons, to talk to you about all kinds of things, ask you questions, get you to do little tests to understand how your brain works. But she did it. She did really well. And finally, then you get, yes, we're going to put you on the waiting list. The waiting list currently, just in Oxfordshire where I am, is 3.5 years.
Wow.
I was just like, what? So, you know, she's already, by this point in year 6, she'll be finished school before we get anywhere. I was just absolutely dumbfounded. So we then had to try and find a way to do that privately. So the school didn't know exactly, because again, they're not there to assess. And we were looking at a whole range of things. So someone had mentioned dyscalculia, which I'd never heard of in my life before. So that's kind of dyslexia, but for maths, in a very simple way to put it. So we started off with that, and they said, no, we don't think that she's got this, but actually we see signs of dyslexia, and potentially we do see possible signs of autism. So then we're looking at more money, going down the route of trying to get an assessment. I think it was autism we booked next. No, it was ADHD we booked next. Which was a no, and then it was autism where we got a yes, and then finally it was dyslexia where we also got a yes. And that took probably about 8 months or so to go through that process. And this is on a private basis because, you know, they've all got waiting lists. And goodness, probably £3,500, I would say, to have all of that done. So very expensive, completely unaffordable for a lot of people. But we got our responses.
I mean, it's good that you did. No, I was going to say it's good that you did, but you know, there's going to be people who aren't fortunate enough to have that kind of money to spend on that kind of thing.
Exactly, and you know, they're stuck. And what I'm seeing now in a lot of my networks is actually GP services and other services are stopping referrals because the system is so backlogged that wait lists have got, in some cases, about 10 years, and it's just impossible. They can't keep up with the demand of people requesting assessments.
Wow.
So yeah, we're absolutely stuck. You know, people are literally, there's no opportunities left for them in some cases. And what they don't understand is that one thing that's really, really useful that I did for myself, that I only found out about, I can't remember how, it must have been through socials or something. But if you have been added to the waiting list, you can then say to your GP, I want to invoke my right to choose, which is something that is in place to give you the option to actually find your own place to do your assessment, and your GP can then refer you to them. So that was what I did for my own assessments, and I was able to go from, I think for me it was about an adults was about a 9-month wait, but I managed to take that down to about 12 weeks by saying, you know, I want to invoke the right to choose and I want to use this provider. So that meant I was able to get my assessments, and I was diagnosed with autism and ADHD earlier this year as well. So very eye-opening, but I only went through that process myself because my daughter had been diagnosed, and I sat there and went, well, I mean, we're like the same person. You know, she's just a tiny version of me, like most children are. But yeah, she is just a tiny version of me. We have the same struggles. We have the same challenges. We argue like crazy because of the way we both see the world. So yeah, it was just what a year it's been.
Do you have, I mean, the fact that you're sort of aligning to each other as mother and daughter is to be expected to a large extent, but to have this neurodiversity aligning in very similar ways as well. I think you said autism and ADHD for you, and autism and dyslexia for your daughter. Yeah. So there's overlap there, and you know, each present their own challenges. Do you have any data or information, or you know, anecdotal or report research based that shows I don't want to use the word damage, that's probably not the right word, but for every sort of month or year of delay when you're young of getting the correct help and support, the repercussions of that? Because it would sound like if you have to wait 3.5 years, again, I'm trying to pick words that are you know, I'll say it as it comes out of my mouth, but hopefully you understand what I'm saying. If you take 3 years to get the treatment, you're just setting yourself further back because you're not getting the right support to allow you to keep moving forward.
Yeah, No, I don't know, but actually, I would love to look into that. I think that's a really interesting point to research, and I'll be putting that on LinkedIn as soon as I can find out. But no, I mean, that's been my worry, because it took so long to get her a diagnosis, and then we've now got this transition in secondary, and their kind of view is, they're doing what they can, but they don't have the funding to give her things like a TA. So you've gone from primary, where they've got, what do they call them, intervention sessions, where a small group of children who struggle more sit outside the classroom and work in a small group with a specific teacher. All that's gone. She's now just in a classroom with 30, 60 students. She's lost. She won't put her hand up and ask questions. So the impact of that is something I'm quite terrified about, because we already know she's a few years behind in terms of where she should be. But how big is that gap going to widen? The more this goes on, the longer it takes for her to get that support. Because if she's sat in a lesson taking none of it in, then there's no point in her being there. She could be at home learning probably much more from, YouTube.
Yeah, it'd be significant, won't it? I mean, that the government are always telling us that, missing a week to go on holiday is detrimental. So that's a student that is on par academically with their peers, miss a week and they fall behind.
Yeah.
So if you're already 2 or 3 years behind, you've just got no hope without support, because you won't understand anything. As every year goes on and it gets more difficult, and the studies are more difficult, you're just going to get further and further behind.
Yeah. And it's always been part of the struggle, because she would be given work that the rest of her group are doing, but if she doesn't understand that work, it's completely pointless. She's not going to take any of it in. She needs to be set work that is something that she can learn from and build on. And again, in primary year 6, that was great. That's what they were doing with her. But now she's just back to being in a year group with everybody else, getting the same work, the same expectations on homework. And that's been something I've been arguing a bit with the school on, because the policies are the policies. They won't bend the policies, which I find bizarre. And she's spending 2.5, 3 hours a night doing homework, of which she understands nothing of, and is stressing me out like crazy, and my husband, because we're trying to teach her. We're not teachers. We've been at work all day. We're exhausted. And it just ends up causing stress and arguments, and she shouldn't be doing that every night. So they said she only needs to do 30 minutes. I was like, okay, you can't tell her that. She knows she's got homework. She has to do it. She's stressed about not doing it, because the teacher in the class will stand there and go, anyone that's not finished their homework needs to make sure it's submitted tomorrow. And in her head, that says, I haven't finished my homework, I've got to finish it. And no one will take her to one side and say, don't worry, we know you've done your 30 minutes. So it's just that level of communication that needs to be thought about. And it's a really simple thing, but her world is that black and white.
Yeah, and that is simple on so many levels. I mean, it doesn't matter what you tell her at home. When she gets into that classroom, that's gone. The teacher stands up, and that teacher's talking to 30 kids individually. And and my wife's a teacher as well as Gaz, who's not here tonight, and she actually also teaches in a school with neurodiverse kids, autism, and all those other neurodiverse things. But I can just imagine a mainstream school where you don't understand the teachers saying your homework needs to be done, or there's a detention or whatever, and your daughter's sitting there and must be terrified half the time. I'm going to get a detention because I've not done it. And all it takes is for the teacher to say at the start of the lesson, don't worry about the homework. What I'm about to say doesn't apply to you. Now, teachers are very stressed. They're overworked. What it needs is the resource in the classroom. It needs the TA in the classroom who can have those little one-to-ones to smooth it over. But ultimately, without the TA working with them, with your daughter all the time, she's just got no hope by the sounds of it. Because how, even when she brings the homework home, how are you supposed to teach her lesson 12 when she hasn't done lessons 1 to 11?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, nail on the head. It's just phenomenal. And I don't quite understand why the funding isn't there for that, because this is an investment in our children. This is an investment in their future. This is an investment in the future of the economy. What jobs are they going to go off and get if they've had absolutely zero support in school? She's incredibly capable. And she's set up our summer house as a nail salon because that's her thing. She's very creative, and she's fantastic at doing nails. And she's got all these little acrylic things. My nails are just finely chopped. I hate nails. I guess that's just part of my sensory thing. But yeah, I hate typing. If I've got nails, I have to chop them. But yeah, she loves having hers long. She loves decorating them. And she's learned how to do all these acrylics and everything that has always been a bit alien to me. And we've talked about her setting up a business. I'm like, I could just go and ask some people on Facebook if they want to come round. You can earn some tips or something. She's like, well, no, I don't have everything I need. She has to have everything she needs. She has to have it all set up exactly as she's seen it on wherever, TikTok probably. So again, it's just trying to teach her those little bits. But I think, like me, I've got along well in terms of my business skill. As much as I struggled more academically, I've run successful businesses. So I think I'm not necessarily worried about her future, but I'm just worried about what it's going to do to her well-being and her mental health in going through that journey. Because the world is not as resilient, I don't think, as it was in my generation when I grew up. But is that a good thing or a bad thing? I think that's a hard call to make, because a lot of, I think, what we learned was probably from more of our negative experiences, and that's what developed our resilience. But should we have gone through all that bad stuff? No, we probably shouldn't have. So, and I'm not going to get into too much detail about that. But I think, it makes a massive impact on who we are. So I'd like to see a world that supports children a bit more. I'd like to see a world that supports adults a bit more. And that's, hopefully something I will be able to help people with, and is kind of the purpose of why I do what I do.
No, that's good, and you're 100% right there in terms of the experiences that we have as a child and as an adult. That's what forms us and makes us the people that we are, and we are more resilient because we've had to be more resilient against some tougher experiences, and maybe life was a little bit harder in the 70s and 80s when Dave and I grew up. I don't know.
Oh, easy. I didn't grow up then, but
you're supposed to be
90s child.
But it's certainly true. That is certainly true. And one of the things I think I find most difficult to reconcile is if we are one of the most taxed nations on earth, and we do have this abundance of wealth in our country, as we're told, then why isn't it being shared out in the places where it needs to? And certainly, why isn't it? Why aren't we reaping the benefits of it? Why isn't our education system the best, education system in the world? And things like that I found frustrating. And for yourself, I can only imagine that it's incredibly frustrating too. But when you talk about like the nail salon and things like that, people will be successful, in different ways. And it sounds to me like there's a little bit of a spark there where if she follows an interest, that she may very well be successful doing that, in the same way that her mother's been successful in the businesses that she's run. They might be very different to the ones that she wants to get into, but people like that will find success regardless, because maybe the education system isn't set up to help us succeed in a world where, that we face when we were suddenly thrown out into, and told to find a job. Nowadays, it's a little bit different. I wouldn't want to be a small business owner with the Labour government that we have at the moment, or the Tory government that we had before. But don't get me started on politics, because we know that Dave and I differ greatly. But I'd be curious to know then from you, good self, and we'll maybe come back to a little bit later to ADHD in adults, because that's what we were going to look at last week, and it fascinates me. We've had guests on in the past, Della, who joined us from the Beer Emporium, who does a very incredible job of running that place, by the way. She was diagnosed of ADHD a couple of years ago, and then interestingly enough, and a similar story to yourself, roughly around about the same sort of time that her children were, because I don't doubt that she took a look at the experiences of a child and thought, hang on a minute, I've seen a lot of those traits in myself that I have then passed on to my children. Maybe I should ask those questions about myself. So with yourself then, if anybody's watching this on the video version rather than listening to the audio, I have to say, underneath Sherry's name, it says founder of Oxford People Solutions and neurodiverse. Did you want to tell us a little bit about that then?
Okay. So Oxford People Solutions is a business I set up last year. In its simplest terms, it's an HR and health and safety consultancy that works with small businesses. So I got into HR from a lot of the bad experiences I had in employment. I think something that's quite prevalent with autism is quite a strong moral code. It seems to be the theme from the research that I've seen and from the people that I talk to. that were also autistic, and that it either worked well for me or it really didn't, you know, depending on who I'm working for, because I will say it how I see it. If it's not right, I'm very passionate about it being done right. And yeah, I've certainly come to blows with various business owners or managers along the time. So I wanted to get into HR. I wanted to understand more about what my rights were, but also so I could help other people around me. So, you know, health and safety. I'm a health and safety nerd. I love a bit of regulation. But I also love to find a good solution to help a small business work around regulation, because some of them are ridiculous. So I work with small businesses, and I like to, I tend to get involved at a point where they've grown, but it's kind of gone a bit sideways because they don't have necessarily the right people skills. You know, they might be technical leaders. I do a lot of work in the STEM space. So you get amazing technical people who can do all this incredible stuff, but they then got to a point where they've got a certain number of people on their team, and it starts to fall apart because they can't control anything anymore. And they've got to start to let some of that control go. So it's just working with them on helping them bring teams back together a bit more. So, you know, we do all the generalized HR stuff, disciplinaries and the grievances and the policies, and all the boring background stuff. But the piece I enjoy the most is kind of just building teams together. And a lot of that, I'm very fortunate now, tends to work along with the kind of neurodivergent piece as well, because it's all about modern legislation, reasonable adjustments, what we can do to get the best out of people, and try to embrace things like neurodiversity, and see the strengths in those people. And actually, if we take that person and put them in a different role, are they going to shine? Quite possibly the answer is yes. So it's just, yeah, trying to look at it through that lens. So that's the HR piece. And then the Nerdiverse, which I kind of like the name of, is very new. It's about to launch, hopefully in November, if I can get my ADHD backside into gear. It is designed to be an online community for neurodivergent people, because I've been through a journey where there's great resources everywhere, but they are scattered. So I've created a fantastic community on LinkedIn, found some amazing people that are doing great things in this space. And I want to create a platform where parents can go, where employees can go, where employers can learn more about what it means to support their employees. And I want there to be resources on there. You know, I don't want it to be a community that's full of videos and full of chaos, because I can't cope with that. But if you need help, you've got a place you can go to. You can have a conversation with somebody. You can find somebody who you can connect with on a level that's going through the same things as you are. And it's going to also then give people advice on things like the right to choose, on things like access to work. And I mean, some of the things I volunteer with, I do a stupid amount of volunteering. I don't know how I fit it in, but I help on an employment law group on Facebook. And one of the comments I shared actually on my LinkedIn feed a month or so ago now was a parent who'd posted about her child and how she'd been treated in the workplace. She was working to try and fund herself through university, and she was autistic. And they had tormented her, got her to do tasks where they were effectively making fun of her, you know, trying to tell her she had to get rid of this mark off of the bar, not being clear that it was a stain, it was a watermark, it's not going to come off. You know, they're giving her all these different things to do to get rid of it, and just laughing behind her back. And then one day they left a note for her that said, kill yourself, because they wanted to test how autistic she was and how much she would follow instructions. And what do you say to that parent? I couldn't believe it. I tried to engage with the pub chain, who completely ignored any of my comments on LinkedIn, and it was quite a public comment. But it's people like that, you know, where do they go? Because she wants to support her child. Her child's had, I think she said, a complete, you know, breakdown, because she dealt so much with childhood bullying. She'd now almost relapsed into that. She just shut herself off. And it takes so long to come out of that, but it just takes one thing to throw you back into it. So yeah, I just want to help those people. I want to create something that means there's a community there, and as much as there's shit going on in the world, there's a safe space, and there are people that care, and there are people that will help.
Yeah, it fills me with despair when I hear stories like that. There's no other word for it. It's despair at that lack of understanding, or that, and this is one of the things that when Sandra joined us a week or two ago, when she wanted to talk about empathy, you know, we as humans find it very, very difficult, or, as Sandra was saying, virtually impossible to see the world from somebody else's eyes. And we know that. But gee whiz, it doesn't take a little bit of, just try. Just try and understand somebody else's perspective. And it's fabulous that there are people out there that are like yourself doing something about it to try and get a little bit more awareness, because don't get me wrong, that is an extreme story that you're sharing there, but I don't doubt that there are people who are facing similar challenges, even with people who are trying to help them, that there just isn't enough knowledge, there isn't enough resources in the workspace in some instances to try and assist people in just doing what they want to do, and living a fulfilling life and contributing to the job that they're keen to do, without having to deal with bullying and nonsense like that. I just find that really, really disappointing. Really, really disappointing. But at the same time, tragically, I'm not too surprised. Dave, you run a business. I don't doubt that isn't something that would go on in your place. I do know that you are a very caring fellow, and we spoke to some of the people that you work with and do business with, and I can tell you that they're all good, honest, decent people. What are your experiences like of this then, Dave? What I'm not saying, I don't want to put you on the spot here, but with the neurodiverse, would you be prepared? What's your level of knowledge like in the business world? I'm scared to ask.
In terms of neurodiversity, there are people in our organization that you would God, I'm terrible at this, Sherry. I'm terrible. I'm going to say, you see, there are this world's mad, but for the right reasons. There are people in our organization that you would put that label on, was what I was going to say. And then I'm thinking, well, how do I say that without saying that? And is it saying that wrong? And that, as a business owner, Adam, this is to your point. And this is probably where Sherry comes in and works with organizations. It's part of the thing she probably covers is the language you use. And it's okay to say things. And if, and sometimes somebody might find those things you say to be wrong. They might take offense at it. And in the normal world, oh God, I'll do it again. This is terrible. Assume you're in a building with a load of people that none of them would identify as being neurodiverse in any way. They're in that middle section of the neurodiverse spectrum, say. And we know from society that person A could say something and person B could choose to take offense. That's what just some people do. They decide they want to take offense. Now, there's other people that will be genuinely offended by something. And what matters is in those situations is that if somebody's genuinely offended, or even if they choose to take offense, when they raise those comments, the person making it has got to adjust their language and the way they interact with that person. And sometimes it could be frustrating if you think they're the former and they're just choosing to take offense. And some things it's just a way of healthy straightening out the dialogue so that two people can have a conversation without upsetting each other. You throw into the mix then neurodiverse people, and particularly within your organization, and you've got to adjust your language, but this time it's not just people who may be choosing offense or maybe taking offense and fully understanding why they're taking offense, because what you said is offended, but it's people who perhaps don't really understand that they're misinterpreting what you're saying or the meaning of what you're saying. It's a bit like what you said, Adam, about empathy, and you can't understand how somebody's feeling. And if you've got somebody that's autistic in particular, that the way you interact with that person is specific to that person, and you can have two people sitting side by side and you can't say the same thing to both people because you'll get a different response. And with autistic people, you have to learn how to communicate with that person, and it's not just you, but within your organization, everybody that interacts has to understand. And if everybody understands how to interact and how to communicate, then you're okay. And I think the challenge is that to get everyone in an organization to appreciate and understand the differences of people around you and adapt. And some people, they don't like adapting for somebody else's benefit. But within an organization particularly, we as business leaders have a responsibility to make it a safe place for everybody, irrespective of whether they're neurodiverse or not.
Yeah.
I did lose track of what I'd asked there a little bit halfway through, but you pulled it back, so well done. Sorry, Sherry, what were you saying?
No, it's just some interesting points, and it's really difficult for business owners to understand the language that isn't going to offend. I mean, from my perspective, if I offend someone, I say, I'm really sorry, I have autism. I think it's a great excuse. But actually, I think one thing that's misunderstood about neurodivergent people is generally they do require an extra level of communication because instructions need to be clear and concise. But actually, wouldn't everyone just benefit from that? Wouldn't that improve organizational communication overall?
100%.
It would, and in my experience, we're dealing with people that are neurodiverse, and particularly with language, is when you ask an open-ended question, there can be a real struggle to answer it. If you ask a question which is binary, you know, if you say, for example, if you say, how did you get on with that task? That can be a really challenging question for somebody with autism to answer. If you said, did you complete that task? They can say yes or no. And if they say no, you can then ask another specific question. What point did you get to? And with a few simple, as Sherry just said, simple, direct questions, clear, you get to where you want to be. It removes ambiguity. If you just say, how did you get on with that task? And the person says, yeah, I did all right. You actually don't even know if they finished the task or not, or how long it took them. So it's a very good point, Sherry, that simplifying and clarity of language benefits everybody.
Yeah, it does.
As is having a good project management system. I will always advocate for that, because then we all know what we need to do and when we need to do it.
I'm a bit chaotic in my work, I'm afraid.
We got that from your response.
I'm a bit last minute.
That's all right. You can work to the last minute deadline.
Yeah, I very rarely fall foul of it. So I've had a lot of practice. As long as you only leave to the last minute the things that you're 100% responsible for yourself, then you're pretty sure. If you need somebody else to chip in and you've left it to the last minute to ask, and you could be in the spot bother.
Yeah. I always used to say to line managers that I was training, I was like, don't give them the actual deadline. Give them like 2 weeks earlier, because then you're giving yourself a bit of wiggle room.
Until you get caught out that you always do that.
Yeah. There's the problem.
True enough. So from yourself then Sherry, so from your diagnosis then, what did that change for you? How did that help you understand how you learn? And do you feel that maybe some of the things that perhaps people would attach to the negatives of that, you found have been positives for yourself in your career?
I think it really helped me to understand why I responded sometimes to the way I did with certain historical challenges that I mentioned before, certain employers, certain other people, and certain things that I've never quite let go of. There's that person in school that you still remember, and you remember exactly what they did to upset you. And if you ever bumped into them again, well, I'd probably do nothing, quite honestly, because I probably wouldn't recognize them. But, in your head, you want to just punch them in the face. I've sidetracked. I've lost where I've gone. What was the question? See, that happens.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm a little bit that way myself, because I forgot what No, I'm only joking. So from your diagnosis, how has that helped you? And have any of those things that people would potentially perceive as a weakness or as a part of your condition, has that been beneficial to you in the way that you work?
I think people would easily take advantage of it, and I think in the past they have. And I felt like it was a weakness on my part because I didn't realise what the situation was. And I worked for somebody who really pushed and put me down. And I ended up, it was a messy exit. Let's just put it that way. And that took me a long time to deal with. So I think understanding this, at least then I can understand why I was going through that process in the way I was, and why at the time I felt like I should be more resilient. I should be able to deal with this better. But I was really hurt by it, really upset that I'd been treated that way for something I'd put so much effort and so much of my life into. So it's been useful. I'm still learning, you know, it's still very fresh, it's still very new. It's been amazing to find the community on LinkedIn, I think, that I've found, because there's so much information and insight there with people who share things. Have we lost him?
I'm here, but my camera's not working.
And I've just pressed the wrong button. Adam is back. He did drop off then. He was just trying to get back.
Yeah, apologies. My camera's playing up. Carry on.
So yeah, I think it's really useful. I think it's good to know, and it's almost someone else described to me when they got a diagnosis as well this year. That it's vindicating. It's you suddenly feel okay about who you are and about some of the struggles that you've had in the past. And you know, it's not necessarily an excuse in that way, but it's just you feel that you can work through your challenges, and at least you know now how to try and adapt yourself and what to say to people as well if you're having a conversation that's a bit difficult. And if someone says something to you that might be a bit offensive, you can just gently say, well, actually, you know, this is my perspective of it, this is my take of it, how do you feel about that? Rather than just go off on a rage, which, you know, is something, I mean, it happens, but would have happened much more beforehand, when you just sort of go from 0 to 100 anger, which is, from what I'm learning, quite common with ADHD. But you have quite a strong sense of justice and a strong sense of logic, I think, for me. So if I see like time being wasted, I hate time being wasted in business. I like things to be very efficient and very productive. And if it's not, it's just, why is it not? Why don't you understand that this is quite a simple principle? And I've learned about myself how to manage those situations better without upsetting people as much, I suppose.
Yeah,
How did you find the process of telling people once you had a diagnosis of ADHD in particular?
I haven't told a lot of people.
You have now.
I have, and I'm all over social media. So everyone I'm connected with on LinkedIn, you know, that's my space. I found it really difficult to tell my husband, and I felt really upset about that, and I didn't really understand why I found it so difficult. But again, it's just that you don't know how you feel about it yourself. And I was like, I want to tell him because I feel like I need to, you know, get that support. And you know, it was amazing. Absolutely incredible. And it's massively helped our communication as well, because we will forever think someone said something and will not understand how it's been said. And his communication is terrible. You know. But yeah, at least now I would just go, right, I'm going to ask clarifying questions, and he understands more why now. And it's not like I'm trying to dig at him. I'm not trying to be difficult or argumentative. I'm trying to understand exactly what it is he's saying. So yeah, it's tough. For my daughter, for her knowing that I'd also got a diagnosis, I think made her feel so much more comfortable and accepting of herself. Because I think if it was just her, I don't know how she would have gone with that. So I think that was a massive comfort for her. And it's kind of nice. It's nice for the two of us, I suppose, because we can work through certain challenges together as well. But, you know, I haven't told my parents. But again,
I know somebody that is dyslexic since a child, and they didn't tell their husband until they've been married for quite some time, and then told them by email because they didn't know how to tell them. So they basically sent an email and said, I've got something to tell you. And the husband's thinking, oh dear, what's this? And it's like, I'm dyslexic. And it was, because it was difficult to do that. And I don't think that person has shared that information with her other friends. So I think it's something that I think they don't want to share and find it difficult to share because they worry about what people will think of them. I've tried to encourage them to share because I think, I know that, you know, it's everybody's different. Everybody is who they are, you know, whether it's dyslexia or autism or any other neurodiversity, it's who you are. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just different to the person to your left, different to the person to the right. And it has its own strengths and weaknesses, the same as My appalling memory has its own strengths and weaknesses, so I can remember very little from my childhood. I mean, me and Adam and Gaz, I mean, Gaz, I've known him since I was a baby, pretty much since nursery school. Adam, I've known since, what, 14, 15, something like that, so good 35 years. And they regularly tell me, in fact, we're out in the pub at the weekend with a friend that apparently I hung around with all the time in sixth form, and I have zero memory of it. In fact, he was telling me how he used to play in my football team, and I had to say, I can't remember that. And this is from when we were like 19 or 20. But equally, it means my brain's not carrying around a load of baggage it doesn't need. That's the way I look at it. Whereas somebody else like Adam has a really good memory.
Used to have. I used to have.
Wow, you know,
I had a pretty serious concussion about 5 years ago, and it's not been so good since then. But no, I remember Rob playing football with us, and to be honest with you, I remember when you said that I'm not so sure I was hanging around with Rob at school. I wouldn't know Rob if I didn't know you. I know Rob through you, and he's no recollection of it. But I find it, and to be fair, from school, his memory was terrible at school as well. So it's not just a recent development. He doesn't need to worry about early onset of Alzheimer's or anything like that. It's just always been terrible.
And I think that's the main reason I didn't do very well at school. But in work and in business, my brain has an uncanny way of remembering the smallest of details from years ago about a decision we made in business, or about a database table that I haven't looked at in 4 years, but when somebody says, where's this data stored, I can remember it or have a good sense of where it is and pull it out pretty quickly. It's just really weird. I just say it's my brain just remembers the things it needs to remember, and anything it doesn't think it needs, it disposes of, which is why I'm terrible at pub quizzes, as Adam can also testify to.
I can. Gaz is very good, but he just sneak off to the toilets to Google things. So that might be why. He's not here to defend himself so we can see it. Yeah. So it's great that you're setting up this neurodiverse. It's terrible that my eyesight couldn't read it to pronounce it properly, but that's another matter.
Nerdiverse.
Nerdiverse.
Gee whiz, I still can't read it. My eyesight is.
I was going to go with neuroverse, but somebody had already taken that. So I went nerdiverse because it just sounds much more fun.
I like nerdiverse.
I like nerdiverse. It sounds good.
Be comfortable being a nerd in whatever format.
Yeah, 100%. So, I mean, I wish you well with that. I do, and I think it's a very honourable thing to do, because I do think a lot of people will take a lot from that. So we start to wrap things up round about the hour mark now. So for yourself, what's the message that you want to get out there, either to people who are neurodiverse or people who fear they could be neurodiverse? And every time we do an episode like this, I start to ask myself the questions. I think, like, but you know what? My wife always says to me, like, whenever I eat food in a certain order. If I start eating my carrots, I'll eat all my carrots before I move on to anything else. And the idea of not doing that, why can't I can't? I just need to eat them first. Have you tried that? No, I'll have it after I'm eating the carrots now. And I don't know if there's a little bit of that in me as well. Certainly reading facial tells and stuff when I was researching into this and seeing that, that the people who are autistic struggle with things like that, I start to ask myself these questions. And if our listeners are out there doing the same as me, asking them questions, what would be the best piece of advice that you could give to them?
I would say to them, try not to be afraid to embrace it. And feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, because there is an incredible community on there of people who have been through this, who advocate for this, and who openly talk about their experiences. And I think what I love about LinkedIn is that you don't have to engage with anything. You can sit in the background and you can be what we call a LinkedIn lurker. You can just take in so much stuff, so much information, and you can see all these experiences and webinars and everything. I think it's learning about who you are, and it's trying to be comfortable doing that. I'm happy to talk to anyone who feels that they might be going through this, who wants just someone to talk things through with. And if you don't feel that you can talk to family and friends, that's fine. But that's the whole point in this community, is that there are people there that you can talk to. Even if you don't talk to anyone else, it's important that you talk to somebody. Even if it's a complete stranger on a park bench someday. Talk to somebody on the bus. I talk to random people in the shop all the time about absolutely nothing. But people don't talk enough anymore. So sometimes it's nice to just grab it onto somebody.
No, 100%. 100%. And I know whenever I go out for a beer, normally with Gaz, I end up talking to some stranger and it really annoys him. But that's another matter. That's a different issue. That is, I'm just very easily sidetracked, as I've just demonstrated. Dave, from a business perspective, what are your thoughts on this episode? What are you going to take away, and what would you like people to take away?
I think, from my perspective in our business, I think we are pretty good at being aware of these things with the people that we've got in our organizations, but there's always things changing and there's always scope to learn more. And the nerdiverse, I always said, what's the Marvel universe one? What's that called? Something verse. That's Spider-Verse. Yeah, it's not that, but I think that's sort of
multiverse.
Multiverse. That was the one. Yeah. I think that kind of community where people can go for support for themselves, they can go for support for their children, and also people from business like me, if I need to educate myself in a way that's informal and I feel I can ask questions without being judged, because as a business leader, it's sometimes difficult to ask the question, because if you think you should already know and you ask the question and you don't know, then you're thinking, oh dear, what have I been doing wrong? And then you therefore don't ask the question. So I think having a safe space where you can ask the question, learn, have those open conversations, what if, but if I said that, what if, how do I do this? How do I approach that? And get a varied experience from varied people. Because that's one of the biggest benefits. You could ask the question and get 10 answers from 10 different people. And they all may resonate different or slightly. Whereas if you just read it from a book or ask Google, you're only going to get a single dimension about how to deal with it. So for me, I think it's a good space. And once it's up online, I'll definitely be looking in onto that and poking my head in and having a look.
We'll be looking for corporate sponsors, definitely.
You won't get him on that one.
It's one of the things I want it to do, though. Ideally, I want to get it to a point where we've got some corporate sponsorship, because that money can then go into a pot that's going to fund people to be able to get private diagnosis and speed up that process for them.
We can have a conversation about that, Sherry.
Lovely.
Yeah, but not on air. That's what he's saying. Well, no. In all fairness, I think there's some really good points there, and the key things I think that I would like people to take away from this is, first of all, be yourself, and don't be ashamed to be yourself. We're all different. We're all on different spectrums, and it don't matter where we are. We're all different. Everybody will sit there and tell you they're normal, and nobody else is, and that's true for everyone. So support that, but at the same time, be respectful of others. Be respectful of other people's differences, whether they're neurodivergent, whether they aren't, whether they call themselves something else. Just be respectful of others, and I think the world will be a much better place if we do that. Sherry, if you have any final thoughts, you want to say goodbye to our listeners, and thank you very much for joining us. I really enjoyed this episode.
Yeah, thank you. It's been great to be involved.
Indeed. So yeah, that wraps us up again for another week. We are back next week with 2 episodes as we start to record our Christmas stuff. We were doing 2. Dave's panic looking at his calendar now. I did tell him. He won't remember that I told him, but I did tell him. We'll be doing 2 episodes, and we will catch you next week when we'll be talking about, as we always say, something entirely different again.